The twin moons hung low in the alien sky, their silver light spilling across the jungle like water. The air was thick with the smell of burning herbs and the sound of strange drums that shook the ground with every beat. James, a human traveler and mechanic, walked carefully through the forest, guided only by flickering torches in the distance. He had been repairing an old survey drone when he got lost, and now, chasing lights, he stumbled into something he could not understand. Through the trees he saw them, dozens of tall, strong figures with skin patterned like stone. They were gathered in a wide clearing, their bodies painted in glowing dyes, and in the center stood a great fire. The flames leapt high, sending sparks into the night. Around the fire, warriors moved in circles, stomping their feet in rhythm with the drums. The sound was not just music, it was a call, a chant, something ancient and heavy with meaning. James froze, realizing too late that they had seen him. Several heads turned, their glowing eyes catching the firelight. Instead of attacking, they shouted something in their language. The crowd roared as if welcoming him. He raised his hands slowly, trying to explain he was only passing through. But before he could take a step back, strong hands pulled him forward into the circle. The villagers cheered louder. Women stood at the edge of the firelight, their faces marked with glowing paint, their eyes sharp and curious. James felt his heart race. He tried to speak, but his words were swallowed by the noise. A tall warrior handed him a carved spear. Pressing it into his palm, the crowd shouted again, their voices blending into the drums. James shook his head. "No, you don't understand. I'm not part of this," he whispered to himself. But his words meant nothing here. The villagers pushed him toward the center, where another warrior stood. This one was massive, his chest scarred, his arms like tree trunks. He held a heavy staff carved with symbols. The two of them now stood face to face, the fire burning between them. The women gasped, the men cheered. James realized too late what was happening. He wasn't a guest, he wasn't a visitor, he had been chosen, dragged into some kind of ritual. The warrior raised his staff high and the drums grew faster. The firelight made the shadows dance. James's breath quickened. Sweat ran down his back. His mind screamed at him to run, but the crowd had closed in. There was no escape. The warrior swung the staff down and James barely jumped aside. The staff struck the dirt with a thundering crack. Sparks shot into the air. The crowd shouted louder. Some laughed, some roared. James stumbled back, holding the spear with shaking hands. He didn't know the rules. He didn't even know the point of this fight. The warrior attacked again, this time faster. James ducked, the staff brushing his hair. His instincts as a mechanic, as a problem solver, kicked in. He wasn't strong, he wasn't trained, but he was clever. He looked around. Sand on the ground, fire close by. Spears and sticks scattered near the edge of the ring. The warrior lunged again. James dropped to one knee, thrusting the butt of the spear into the ground. The larger man tripped, stumbling over it, crashing hard onto the dirt. For a second, silence fell. Then the entire crowd erupted. The drums boomed, voices shouted, hands clapped, women gasped, their painted faces lit with shock and awe. James stood frozen, still clutching the spear. His chest heaved, his body shaking. He hadn't meant to fight, he hadn't meant to win, but somehow in their eyes he had. The fallen warrior groaned. Rolling onto his side, defeated, the chief of the tribe, a towering figure with golden markings across his face, stepped forward. He raised his arms to the sky, shouting words James couldn't understand. The crowd answered, their roar like thunder. The women lowered their heads, some covering their faces, some staring straight at him. James tried to explain, waving his hands. "Wait, I didn't mean..." This was a mistake. But no one listened. To them the gods had spoken. The ritual had chosen. The human had triumphed. The fire roared higher, the drums slowed. The women began to step forward. One by one, as if being presented, James's heart sank. He didn't understand fully, but deep down, he felt the weight of what just happened. He had walked into a celebration, into a sacred trial, and without knowing the rules, without even trying, he had won. The festival was no longer strange, it was terrifying. For James had just claimed something he never asked for, and the tribe would never let him walk away from it. The night had grown darker, but the fire still burned high. Smoke curled upward into the sky, and the two moons watched silently above. James stood in the circle, sweat still dripping from his face. His chest rose and fell quickly. His mind spun with confusion. Around him, the tribe cheered as if he had done something great. But in his heart, he felt dread. The fallen warrior had been carried away. Not with shame, but with honor. The villagers touched James's arms, slapped his back, and raised their voices to the sky. They shouted words he could not understand, but their tone was clear. They had accepted him as the winner. James tried to back away, but each step was blocked by eager hands. They pushed him forward again. Closer to the fire, the chief raised both arms, and silence fell across the clearing. Even the drums stopped. His golden markings glowed under the firelight as he began to speak. His deep voice rolled like thunder. The tribe listened with reverence. James only caught fragments, strange words that sounded sharp and heavy. But one thing he did understand. When the chief pointed at him, the crowd answered with a single word. Over and over, their voices shook the night. James's stomach turned. Something was wrong. He tried to raise his hands. Listen, I'm not one of you. I didn't mean to fight. I didn't mean to win. But his words vanished into the chanting. The women now stepped forward, their bodies painted in shining lines that caught the light. They moved gracefully, heads bowed, eyes fixed on him. James's throat went dry. The chief shouted again. And this time the meaning was clear. The ritual had been about more than strength. It was about choosing, about bonding. James realized in horror what had happened. By defeating their warrior, he had unknowingly claimed the highest prize of the night, the tribe's women, the mates, the ones who were meant to belong to the victor. He shook his head, his voice trembling. No, I don't want this. I don't even belong here. But the crowd only grew louder. Their cheers drowned him out. The women stood still, their faces unreadable. But their eyes betrayed them. Some looked afraid, some curious, and some even hopeful. James's heart pounded. He felt trapped. He wanted to run into the forest, away from all of this. But the tribe closed around him like a wall. There was no way out. He thought of Earth, of the workshop he once worked in, the smell of engine oil, the sound of machines. That world felt far away now. Like a dream here, he was something else. Not a mechanic, not a traveler, but a man caught in destiny. The chief spoke again. Lifting a carved staff high, the villagers lowered their heads. Bowing to the fire, the women followed, their long hair falling over their shoulders. Then, as the chief's words ended, they raised their heads together, their eyes locked on James. He took a step back, his body shaking. One woman stepped closer than the rest. She was tall, her skin shimmering in the firelight. Her markings were more delicate. Painted with care, she tilted her head slightly, studying him as if he were a strange creature. James met her eyes, and for the first time he saw not fear, but something softer, curiosity. She whispered words he could not understand, then touched her chest and spoke a single name. He realized she was telling him who she was. She then pointed at him, waiting. James swallowed hard. James, he said quietly. She repeated it clumsily, her voice smooth but unfamiliar with the sound. The crowd cheered again, as if the gods themselves had heard it. James's knees weakened. He could barely stand. He felt the weight of their stares, the weight of what they expected him to be. Their champion, their protector, their new leader of women. He wanted to deny it, but his body betrayed him. He stood in the center of their world, and they had already decided. The villagers began to dance again. Circling the fire, the drums returned. Faster and louder, James stood frozen. The women moving closer. Surrounding him, he felt like a prisoner. A bird caught in a cage made of music and firelight. His mind screamed at him to resist. But his body did not move. The first woman, the one who spoke her name, touched his arm gently. Her eyes searched his. James realized she was not mocking him. She was not celebrating. She was asking something silently. Was he truly the one they thought he was? Would he accept? Would he run? James turned his head, looking at the fire. The villagers, the moons above. The stars seemed distant. Silent judges. His chest tightened. He wanted freedom. But he also saw the truth. The tribe would never allow him to simply leave. To them, his victory was no accident. It was fate. The celebration grew louder, and the villagers pulled him toward a platform near the fire. They placed him there above the crowd. He stood with the women below, the first woman still watching him carefully. The chief raised his staff once more. His voice rang across the night, announcing the decision of the gods. James gripped the edge of the platform. His mind raced. He had not chosen this, but it was already his. He was no longer just a traveler lost in the jungle. He was the human who won the ritual. And now, whether he wanted it or not, the tribeswomen were his. The night faded slowly into dawn. The fire burned low, casting only soft red light across the clearing. The villagers had returned to their huts, leaving only silence behind. James sat alone on the edge of a wooden platform. His hands gripped his knees, his thoughts heavy and tangled. He felt like a man trapped in a dream he did not choose. The women had been taken to their side of the camp, but one had remained near him. The tall woman who had spoken her name. Her eyes had followed him with quiet focus, and now, as the first light of morning painted the sky, she returned. She carried a clay bowl filled with water. Steam rising from it, she placed it in front of him, then sat down without speaking. James hesitated. His throat was dry. His lips cracked. Slowly, he dipped his hands into the bowl. Splashing his face, the coolness made him sigh. "Thank you," he said softly. The woman tilted her head. Repeating the sound, her voice was careful. As if testing each word, she tapped her chest again. "Sail," she whispered, repeating the name she had given him last night. James nodded. "Sail," he said. Pointing toward her, she smiled faintly, then pointed at him. "James." Her voice was awkward but clear. The sound of his name and her tone made something stir in his chest. It was strange, but in that small moment, the fear in his heart eased. Sail reached into a small pouch tied to her waist. Pulling out a strip of cloth painted with simple symbols, she laid it on the ground between them. Then, using her finger, she pointed to one shape, a circle, and then touched the rising sun. James understood. She was teaching him. Circle meant sun. She pointed to another mark, then touched her chest. Repeating her name again, James leaned forward, curiosity pushing aside his dread. He tapped the symbol and said, "Sail." She smiled wider. Nodding, then she pointed to him, drawing a new shape with her finger in the dirt. James laughed nervously. "That's me, James." She tried again, her voice softer. "James." He nodded, smiling despite himself. The morning passed with simple lessons. Sail taught him words for fire. Water, sun, sky. James repeated them clumsily, his tongue heavy with the alien sounds. Still, she was patient, laughing gently when he failed, nodding firmly when he succeeded. For the first time since the ritual, he felt less like a prisoner and more like something else. When the drums began to beat in the distance, Sail's face grew serious. She pointed toward the forest. Then at him, her eyes warned of danger. James frowned, not understanding. She picked up a small spear and handed it to him, pressing it into his hand as the villagers had done the night before. But this time her touch was gentle. Almost pleading, he followed her through the camp, where others whispered and stared. Some bowed their heads as he passed, others scowled in silence. James felt the weight of every eye, but Sail walked proudly beside him as if she was not ashamed. At the edge of the clearing, she stopped, pointing again at the trees. Then she crouched low, showing him how to move silently step by step. James tried to mimic her, clumsy but willing. They moved together into the jungle, the air heavy with mist. Birds with glowing feathers darted between branches, and strange calls echoed from unseen creatures. James's heart raced, but Sail seemed calm, her eyes sharp, her movements fluid. After a while, she raised her hand. Signaling him to stop, she pointed toward the ground, where large claw marks dug deep into the soil. James crouched, studying them. They were fresh, too fresh. He swallowed hard. Sail's voice was low. One word repeated, "Gra." She drew a shape in the dirt. A long body with sharp teeth. James understood. It was a predator. And it was close, before fear could root him in place. Sail placed her hand on his arm, steadying him. Her touch was firm, reassuring. She pointed to her spear, then to his. Her eyes met his, telling him silently they would face this together. James felt his breath slow. He nodded, tightening his grip. They moved deeper, every step cautious, until the sound came. A low growl from the shadows. James's skin prickled. A massive shape shifted in the mist, two glowing eyes staring at them. The beast was unlike anything on Earth, covered in spiked scales. Its jaw lined with long teeth. Sail raised her spear. Her body ready, James mirrored her, though his hands trembled. The beast lunged, and for a heartbeat. Time froze. Sail shouted, leaping to the side. James thrust his spear forward more by instinct than skill. The weapon scraped against the beast's hide, sparks flying. The creature roared, turning toward him. Its massive claw swung down. James barely rolled aside. The earth split where he had stood. Sail struck then, her spear sinking deep into its flank. The beast shrieked, twisting wildly. James scrambled up, grabbing a heavy branch from the ground. He swung with all his strength, striking its head for a moment. The creature stumbled, then together he and Sail drove their spears forward, forcing it back into the trees with one final roar. It turned and fled into the jungle, crashing through the undergrowth until the sound faded. James collapsed onto the dirt. His chest burning, Sail stood above him, her breath heavy but her eyes fierce. She looked down at him, then offered her hand. He took it, pulling himself up. Their eyes met, and in that silence, something shifted. They were no longer strangers. Not enemies, not captor and captive, but partners. Sail touched her chest again, speaking softly. "Mate," she said. The word hung in the air. James froze. He wanted to deny it, to push it away, but the way she looked at him with respect, with trust, stopped him for the first time. James wondered if fate had not cursed him but chosen him. The jungle was alive with noise, yet James could not hear it. His mind still replayed the fight with the beast. The way Sail's hand had steadied him, the way her eyes had looked into his. He sat near the fire at the edge of the village, cleaning the spear with slow, careful motions. His heart beat faster than he wanted to admit. Sail sat beside him, quiet, sharpening her own weapon with steady hands. The villagers had gathered earlier, whispering and pointing at him. Some looked at him with respect, others with suspicion. The chief had spoken to the elders in low, serious tones. The word Gra had been repeated many times. James guessed it meant the creature they had fought. Yet there was more in their voices, more than fear of one beast. Something larger was brewing. As the sun lowered, painting the sky with orange light, the chief called the village together. His staff struck the ground, and silence spread across the crowd. James stood at the edge, Sail at his side. The chief's golden markings glowed faintly as he spoke. His words were heavy, filled with warning. James could not understand, but he felt the weight of every sound. Then the chief pointed to the forest beyond the clearing. His voice grew louder, angrier. The crowd murmured in fear. Mothers held their children closer. Warriors tightened their grips on their spears. Sail leaned toward James, whispering one word slowly, as if she wanted him to remember it well. "Raiders." The word struck like thunder. James's stomach knotted. He looked at her face, serious and grim. She drew a shape in the dirt with her finger. Many figures, carrying weapons, attacking. James understood. They were not safe here. The tribe was not just celebrating him. They were preparing for a coming war. Later that night, James followed Sail into one of the storage huts. Inside were baskets filled with dried meat, clay jars of water, and racks of spears and knives. Sail pointed at the weapons, then at him. Her meaning was clear. He was expected to fight. James felt cold inside. "I'm not a soldier," he whispered under his breath. He had been a mechanic, a builder of machines, not a killer. Yet when he looked at Sail, at the faint scar across her shoulder, at the determination in her eyes, he knew he could not refuse. She believed he was chosen. She believed he could protect. James took one of the smaller spears, gripping it tightly. The next day, the jungle grew restless. The air felt heavy, filled with tension. James helped repair the wooden walls around the village. His hands, used to fixing engines, now tied ropes and sharpened stakes. Some warriors watched with skepticism, but when they saw how fast and clever his work was, their scowls softened. He showed them how to reinforce weak points, how to lash the wood tighter. Sail stood proudly, explaining his actions to the others in their language. When night came, the drums did not play. The village was quiet, torches burning low. James lay awake in a small hut. Listening to the silence, Sail sat nearby, her spear across her lap. Watching the shadows, she had not spoken much, but her presence alone gave him strength. Suddenly, a horn echoed from the forest. Low and long, the villagers rose at once, warriors grabbing their weapons. Children cried. Women rushed them into huts. James's heart jumped. He ran outside, seeing figures at the edge of the trees. Dozens of them, their torches glowing red. Their armor was darker, heavier, their eyes cruel. The raiders stepped forward, shouting in harsh tones. The chief answered, raising his staff. The air was thick with tension. James's hands trembled as he lifted his spear. Sail stood beside him, her face calm but her grip tight. Then the first arrow flew, striking the dirt near the fire. The village erupted, warriors charged, spears clashing with blades. The air filled with screams and the sound of wood splintering. James froze for a moment, the chaos overwhelming. Then Sail shouted his name, pulling him into motion. He ducked as a raider swung at him, instinct guiding his body. He jabbed forward with his spear. Catching the man in the leg, the raider stumbled. Giving James enough time to shove him back, his heart pounded. Fear and adrenaline crashing together. Another came, and James grabbed a burning torch, thrusting it into the raider's face. The man cried out, falling back into the fight. Sail fought like fire itself, her spear flashing, her body moving with grace and fury. James watched her take down 2 raiders, each strike precise. Yet for every enemy that fell, more came. The walls shook as raiders tried to break through. The villagers screamed as arrows struck roofs. Fire spread quickly, sparks climbing into the night sky. James's chest burned, his arms ached, but he did not stop. He fought beside Sael back to back. Every strike of his spear was clumsy but desperate. Every move meant survival. He remembered the machines he had built on Earth. The tools in his hands, now this spear was his only tool. This battle his only work. The fight dragged on. But slowly the raiders began to retreat. Their leader shouted, calling them back with curses and growls. They melted into the shadows of the forest, leaving behind broken spears, blood, and fire. Silence returned, broken only by the cries of the wounded. The village was scarred, but it still stood. James collapsed onto the dirt, his chest heaving, his arms shook. Sael knelt beside him, her hand pressing against his shoulder. Her eyes, though tired, shone with fierce pride. The chief raised his staff, shouting once more. The villagers gathered around James and Sael, their eyes wide, some bowed, some whispered. James did not understand their words, but he understood their stares. He was no longer just the outsider who stumbled into a ritual. He was part of this now, and deep inside he knew this was only the beginning. The raiders would return stronger, angrier. The tribe would need him. The women would need him. And though he had never chosen this path, James felt the weight of destiny pressing down on his shoulders. The smoke of battle still lingered in the air. The village smelled of burnt wood and blood. Broken spears and shattered shields lay scattered across the ground. James sat near the remains of the fire, his hands trembling. His body ached from every strike. Every desperate move he had made, Sael sat close beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The tribe had survived the first attack, but the price was heavy. Several huts were destroyed, warriors lay wounded. Children cried in their mothers' arms. The villagers worked quickly, carrying the injured to the healer's tent. James wanted to help, but when he stood, many eyes turned toward him, some filled with gratitude, others still with doubt. Later, the council of elders gathered. The chief stood tall in the center. His golden markings faded with ash. Around him, voices rose in argument. Some pointed at James, shouting in harsh tones. Others shook their heads, speaking calmer. The language was still foreign, but the meaning was clear. His presence was being questioned. Sael stood suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise. She pointed at James, her words sharp and fierce. Her tone carried the weight of defense. She was not only protecting him with her spear, but now with her voice, James felt a knot in his chest. She was risking herself to prove his worth. But not everyone agreed. One elder, his face marked with black paint, stepped forward, his eyes burned with suspicion. He pointed at James, then at the broken walls. His words dripped with blame. The people murmured in agreement. For them, the attack had meaning. It was the gods' test. And maybe the human was a curse. The chief silenced them, striking his staff against the ground. His gaze fell on James. He raised his voice, and the villagers grew quiet. Then he pointed beyond the village toward the jungle. His voice rang out with one word that even James understood. Trial. James's stomach twisted. He looked at Sael, who lowered her head in worry. She explained with broken words and gestures. He would have to face a challenge alone, not with warriors, not with the tribe, if he survived. He would prove his loyalty. If he failed, he would be nothing. That night, as the moons rose, James was led to the edge of the jungle. The villagers gathered in silence, their eyes glowed with expectation. Sael stood apart from the others, her expression fierce, but her body tense before he left. She pressed something into his hand, a small charm carved from bone. Her voice was soft. Live? James nodded, his throat tight. He stepped into the shadows of the forest. Alone, the jungle swallowed him, its sounds strange and threatening. Every crack of a branch made his heart race. His hands gripped a simple spear, the only weapon they had given him. Hours passed, the night grew deeper. He walked carefully, every step heavy. He thought about Earth, about how far he was from his workshop, from the machines that never asked him to bleed. But then he thought of Sail, of her trust, her defense before the council, her voice calling his name in battle. That thought kept his feet moving. Suddenly the silence broke. From the brush came a low growl. James froze. His eyes darted through the shadows until they caught the faint glimmer of eyes watching him. More than one pair, his chest tightened. He realized this was no simple test of survival. The elders had sent him against the beasts of the night. 3 figures stepped from the darkness, smaller than the Gra but quicker. Their bodies sleek, their claws curved. Their teeth gleamed in the moonlight. James backed away, his spear shaking. The beast circled him, growling low. The first lunged. James thrust the spear forward. Catching it in the shoulder, the creature yelped. But the force knocked him to the ground. The second leapt at his side. James rolled away, grabbing a rock and slamming it into the beast's jaw. Pain shot through his arm, but he kept fighting. The third lunged. Claws raking his leg, James cried out, kicking hard, forcing it back. Blood dripped from his wound. His body screamed to stop, but his mind refused. He forced himself to stand. Gripping the spear tighter, the beast circled again. But James's eyes burned with new fire. He remembered Sail's words live. He would not fall here. Not now. With a shout, he charged first, thrusting the spear with desperate strength. The beasts recoiled, surprised by his sudden attack. He swung the spear wide, striking one across the face. He slammed his shoulder into another, forcing it into a tree. His fear was gone now, replaced by raw survival. At last the beasts broke. Retreating into the shadows, their growls faded until only silence remained. James collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving. His hands shook, his body weak, but he was alive. He clutched the bone charm in his fist, whispering to himself, "I lived." When morning came, he limped back toward the village. His body was bruised, his leg torn, but his eyes carried strength. The villagers gasped as he appeared from the trees. Some bowed their heads, others raised their voices. The chief struck his staff, declaring his survival to the tribe. Sail rushed forward, her face breaking into relief. She grabbed his arm, steadying him. Her touch was warm. Her eyes shone with pride. She whispered again, "Mate," and this time James did not look away. The trial had not broken him. It had forged him in the eyes of the tribe. He was no longer just the outsider. He was now one of them, bound by blood, sweat, and loyalty. The village was restless. The trial had ended, but its echo still hung in the air. James had returned alive, wounded yet standing, carrying the proof of his survival on his torn skin and tired eyes. The villagers had cheered, but the council of elders remained divided. To them, his victory meant something powerful, but also dangerous. James sat near the healer's tent, his leg wrapped in leaves and herbs that stung with every breath. Sail stayed beside him, never leaving. She fed him water from a clay cup, her hands gentle, her eyes fierce whenever someone passed too close. In those moments, James felt the bond between them grow deeper, more real. He was not just surviving for himself anymore, he was surviving for her. And for the people who now looked to him with mixed hearts, the chief called the council again. This time the entire tribe gathered. The fire burned high in the center, sparks rising into the night sky. The villagers formed a circle, their faces lit with orange glow. The chief raised his staff, his golden markings shining in the firelight. His voice carried strong, filled with authority. The elders spoke one by one. Some praised James, calling him chosen, pointing to the beasts he had slain. Others warned that his arrival had brought only conflict. The raiders had attacked after his victory. Perhaps the gods had sent him as a curse. Their voices rose, sharp and accusing. The villagers murmured, divided. James stood slowly, his body weak but his spirit strong. He could not understand their words, but he understood their tone. He stepped forward. Gripping the bone charm Sail had given him, he raised it high, his voice steady though his heart thundered. "I am not curse," he said, pointing at himself. Then at the villagers, "I fight, I protect." The people grew silent. His broken words carried more weight than perfect speech. Sail stood at his side, her voice rising in support. She spoke with fire, pointing at James, reminding them of his battles, his wounds, his courage. The villagers murmured again, softer now. Then a shout came from the edge of the circle. A messenger rushed in, his chest heaving. His words spilled out fast. The meaning became clear even to James. The raiders had returned. They were not gone, they were gathering, stronger this time, demanding something. The chief turned to the messenger, his face grim. The words came sharp. Human, give, peace. James felt his stomach twist. The raiders wanted him. They believed his presence gave the tribe strength, and they demanded his surrender. The council erupted. Some cried out that handing him over would save them. Others shouted that surrender was shame. Sael's face darkened. She stepped closer to James, her hand on his arm. Her voice was cold and sharp. She would never let him be taken. The chief struck his staff. Silencing the noise, he turned his gaze on James. The weight of the tribe's future lay in that stare. His words came slow, deliberate. He was giving James the choice, leave and save himself, or stay and bring war. James's chest tightened. His mind screamed for escape. He had not asked for any of this. He had not chosen to fight beasts or raiders, or to win women in a ritual he never understood. He wanted to go home, to machines, to Earth. But when he looked around the circle, at the faces of the children clutching their mothers, at the warriors wounded yet proud, and most of all at Sael's steady eyes, he knew the truth. He could walk away, and they would die, or he could stay and fight. James stepped forward, lifting his spear. His voice rang out, strong this time. "I stay," he said. His words were simple, but they carried across the fire. The villagers gasped. Sael's hand gripped his tighter. The chief stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. The decision was made. The tribe roared, some with relief, some with fear, but all with certainty. The human had chosen. He was theirs, and they were his. That night, as the village prepared for battle, James sat alone by the fire, Sael beside him. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering in their language words he could not fully understand, but he felt them in his heart. She was telling him he was no longer outsider. He was one of them, bound not by accident but by choice. James closed his eyes, the weight heavy but the path clear. Tomorrow would bring war, and he would stand not as prisoner, not as stranger, but as protector. The night was heavy with silence. The jungle, usually alive with cries and whispers, had gone still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. In the center of the village, fires burned low, casting long shadows over sharpened stakes and repaired walls. Warriors stood ready with spears, their faces painted with glowing marks of war. Mothers clutched their children inside huts. Whispering quiet prayers, James stood with Sael near the gates, his legs still sore from the trial, his arms tired from days of labor. Yet his grip on the spear was firm. His eyes no longer carried the confusion of a lost traveler. They held the steel of a man who had chosen. Sael looked at him, her gaze steady, her voice low. "Together," she whispered. Then came the sound. A horn echoed through the trees, followed by the beat of drums, but not the sacred drums of the tribe. These were harsh, violent. The raiders had come. Torches flickered between the trees, dozens, then hundreds. The ground trembled under the march of their feet. Their leader stepped forward, a tall figure clad in dark armor, his voice sharp as he shouted toward the village. His words were foreign, but his meaning was clear. Surrender the human, or be destroyed. The chief stepped onto the wall, his golden markings shining in the firelight. He raised his staff high. His voice answered, strong and unyielding. The tribe would not bow. The raiders roared, and the attack began. The jungle exploded with chaos. Arrows whistled through the air. Spears clashed against shields. Fire spread as torches rained down on the huts. The raiders surged like a dark wave. Their blades flashing, James felt his heart thunder. But he did not step back. He raised his spear and charged with the warriors. Sael at his side, the first clash shook him to his core. A raider swung, and James barely blocked. The force sent pain through his arms, but he twisted, driving his spear into the man's chest. The raider fell, and James gasped for breath. There was no time to think. Another came, and James swung a burning torch into his face. Sael's spear struck from behind. Saving him, they moved as one, back to back. James's strikes were clumsy but fueled by desperation. Sael's movements sharp and precise around them. The villagers fought with all they had. Warriors roared, defending their homes. Women threw stones and burning branches from the huts. Children hid in the shadows, clutching each other in silence, but the raiders were many, and their strength pressed harder. The walls shook under their assault. A section collapsed, and the enemy poured through. James's chest tightened with fear. He could see the panic in the villagers' eyes. If they broke completely, it would be the end. James's mind raced. He was not stronger than the raiders, but he was a mechanic, a builder. He saw the fire spreading across a broken hut, saw the oil jars near the storage hut, and suddenly he knew what to do. He shouted to Sail, pointing. She understood instantly. Together they dragged the jars, smashing them near the collapsed wall. James grabbed a torch and hurled it. Flames erupted, a wall of fire cutting off the raiders. The tribe roared with new hope. The battle turned. The raiders tried to regroup, but the fire split their ranks. James pushed forward, leading a desperate charge. His body screamed with exhaustion, but he did not stop. He slammed his spear into another raider, shoved another back into the flames. Sail fought beside him, her hair glowing in the firelight, her eyes fierce as she cut down every enemy that dared to come close. Finally, the raider leader himself stepped forward, towering, his dark armor shining. He swung a massive blade, scattering warriors aside, his eyes locked on James. His voice thundered with challenge. James's chest tightened. He was no trained fighter, but he could not back down. Not now, not with the tribe watching. Not with Sail at his side. The leader charged. His blade crashed down. James barely blocked, the force nearly breaking his arms. The crowd gasped. James stumbled, his spear shaking. The leader raised his weapon again, ready to strike the killing blow, but Sail leapt, her spear cutting across the leader's arm. He roared in pain, turning on her. In that instant, James's fear vanished. He lunged forward with all his strength, driving his spear into the gap of the leader's armor. The man staggered, choking, then collapsed into the dirt. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then the raiders cried out, fear replacing their fury. They turned and fled back into the jungle. Leaving their fallen behind, the tribe erupted in cheers. Warriors raised their weapons. Voices shouted James's name. Mothers wept with relief. The chief lifted his staff high, declaring the victory to the gods. James stood trembling, covered in sweat and blood, his body nearly breaking, but his spirit unyielding. Sail stepped to him, her hand on his chest. Her eyes shone, not with fear, but with pride and warmth. She whispered the word again. Mate. James looked at her, then at the tribe. The people who had doubted him, who now cheered his name. He realized the truth. He had not only won a ritual, not only fought a battle, he had won a place. The tribe accepted him, not as outsider, not as curse, but as protector, as one of their own. The women stood proudly beside him, no longer prizes, but partners. The elders bowed their heads. The children whispered his name with awe. James looked up at the sky, the twin moons glowing above. For the first time, he did not feel lost, he did not feel trapped, he felt chosen. He had walked into the strange festival as a stranger. He now stood as something more, a man with a new family, a new destiny, and though Earth was far away, he knew this was where he was meant to be.